I was only principal for 3 years, from 1957, 58 and 59.
What dreams or expectations did you have for the school?
I wanted to make a few improvements because I'd come from a college where we had everything, and when I came down here I wanted to have a bit more silence in the classes I had, because we only had a big red curtain separating the ones, twos and threes from the kinders and the transition class.
What did the school look like back then?
Well, it was a church school then, and during the week it was a school, and on Sundays it was a church. So we had to use the same desks that the children used during the week were turned into seats for the Sunday Mass. So well, it was just a church school. It's that red building that's behind me now. It was the original building that was here.
How many children were in a class?
There wouldn't have been more than, well, there were only about 60 children in the whole school, and at that time it was 5 classes, so there wouldn't have been more than 10 children, much more than 10 children in each class. There were just 5 classes then.
How did the children get to school?
They walked. I don't think too many mums had to drive them. In those days I think there was only one family car, and Dad would take that car to work. No, they would walk, because they mainly came just from around this area. It was within walking distance.
What high schools did most people go on to? What were the fee schools back then?
When they completed year 2 here, from 3rd grade up, they either went up to St Mary's, which was a full primary school, or they went to St Aidan's at Maroubra Junction. And after they left, the boys left in grade 2 from here, and they would go off to Maroubra Randwick or to the Christian Brothers at Waverley, and the girls, I said, would either go to St Aidan's or they would go to the Brigidine College at Randwick, because there was a bus going from Maroubra Beach to Randwick in those days.
What does it mean to be a nun of the Brigidine order?
Well, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I've been in the order for 64 years, and it's a great privilege to be called Maroubra, to be either a nun or a priest or a mother, and I wouldn't have had any other life but the one that I've had.
What was Maroubra like back then?
Well, it certainly wasn't like it is today with all these beautiful homes around us. There was a lot of open space, and the children, as I said, we only had about 60 children, but it was the biggest playground that I've ever taught in, and I've taught in 10 schools all over Australia. They had plenty of room to run around because it was all grass and sand, and we had no big fence like we have here now. In fact, I don't think we ever had a fence. But the roads were all not as busy as they are now, because there weren't so many vehicles on the road, nor as many people living in Australia at the time, but they were never allowed to go near the road without permission of the sisters. Now, this picture is how the Brigidine Sisters used to dress, and this older nun here is Mother Paul King. Now, when I went to school at St Aidan's, Mother Paul taught me in the high school there, 1st, 2nd and 3rd year, and she was the very first Brigidine sister to teach in Maroubra, and I think they came about 1915, and they used to walk from the Randwick Brigidine College across Sand Hills to come to Maroubra. Sometimes they would come in a tram, but more often they walked. I don't know how long it took them. And that's me in the old habit, and Mother Paul taught me at school. Now, this photo was taken when I paid a visit from, I was stationed in Perth at the time, and I had to bring a sick sister over to Sydney, and I had this photo taken with Mother Paul. I loved her because she was my old teacher. Now, she was the very first nun, Brigidine sister, to teach at St Aidan's, and I'm the very last sister to teach at St Aidan's. I'm the only nun who's Brigidine sister who's teaching at St Aidan's at the moment. This was the community of Brigidine Sisters. I think there are 8 of us there, is that right? Yes, 8 of us, and we had a convent, or actually it was a duplex building, and it was directly opposite where the church, where St Mary's Church is at the moment, and we 8 of us lived there, and 2 of us, Mother Louise McCarthy, and I was Mother Patrick then in those days, we two used to walk from St Mary's down Malabar Road to come to school here. And this picture was taken in 1959. It was just before I left Maroubra Bay to go to Perth. And some of these other nuns here, these other nuns, one was a music teacher, and the other nuns taught in St Mary's at the time.
What years were you at this school?
I started in this school in 1975 in kindergarten down here at the St Joseph's site, and then I finished in Year 4 in 1980 because then I went on to Marsland Junior College for Year 5 and 6.
When you went to school here, what did it look like?
The school was a bit different back then. There were 2 campuses. There was the junior school down here, which was kindergarten to 2nd class, and 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th were up at St Mary's, where the church is now. So there were 2 separate schools. It was the one school but 2 separate sites.
What changes do you see in our school today?
Oh, massive changes. The fact that it's all now on one campus. The range of facilities now is amazing. We've got a beautiful new hall. The classrooms are so much bigger and brighter. There's so many different things, a bigger playground, lots of different things.
What did you love the most about your time at SMSJ?
I think the best thing was all the friends you make here at school. I mean, school, you learn maths everywhere, but it's the different friendships you make, especially with people that live in the area, that live in Maroubra. So that was the best thing about being at this school.
Who was the principal when you were there?
There were a few principals when I was here. When I first started in kindergarten, there was Mrs. Nacken was the principal, and then when I moved up to the senior school, up to the St Mary's campus, Sister de Montfort was our principal, one of the Brigidine nuns.
What sports did you play?
In the winter we played rugby. I used to play rugby in the winter for the school, and in summer we used to just play cricket out on the pitch. So we used to just play backyard cricket.
How many students were at the school?
I'm not sure how many exactly, but well over 200 or 300 students. It was quite a good school. It was quite a big school for its day.
Who was the parish priest during your time at St Peter St Joseph?
There were 2 parish priests because there were 2 churches. So here at St Joseph's there used to be a church here, a parish church, and the parish priest was Father John Noonan. And then when up at the main church there was Father Ed Barry, who was the parish priest.
Were the same subjects still taught back then?
The subjects were the usual one, maths and English and sentence and grammar, and dictation was one that we used to have on Friday. We used to have our spelling test and then dictation, and so that used to be something that stressed us always. We had to get all our words right and we had to memorise the dictation and do that. We didn't do anything like computing because in those days there was no computing being taught at school, so there was no internet or anything like that, so we didn't learn any of that.
What was your favourite book?
I don't know, I like to read a lot, so there are lots of different favourite books. I remember there's one about Charlie Brown at the Olympics that I liked.
How many children were in each class?
In each class, I think there were about between 25 or 30 students, depending on the classes. But we were all separate classes, there were no mixed classes. There was no combined 3rd class, 4th class, it was always a separate class for each year group.
What was your school rules?
The school rules, you always had to be kind. You weren't allowed to run in the playground. You had to walk everywhere. You weren't allowed to throw papers on the ground or you'd get into trouble. You had to always be polite to people, and you weren't allowed to bully. So even back then we were told bullying was not allowed in the school.
What kind of technologies do you have?
Oh, not much really. There were no computer, there was no iPods, no iPhones, no internet. We used to do very simple things. We used calculators. When we started to get into 4th class, we used to use calculators. And the only other thing that was a big thing for us was when you're allowed to go from a pencil to using a pen. And you used to get your pen license. I don't know if they still do that these days. And that was a big thing for all us kids. If you got your pen license, everyone was really proud to show their pen license to all their friends.
What would a normal day be like for you?
Normal day, when I was coming down here, my mum would drop me down to school here with my brother. And we would have an assembly every morning in the quadrangle there, where we'd have our morning prayer with the school, and then we'd go off into our different classes and then break up into our different subjects. So the teacher would teach us maths and English and spelling. Then we'd have a little lunch. We used to call it little lunch. I think now they call it recess. We used to call it little lunch. And then we'd go back into class for a bit more, and then we'd have our big lunch, which was the main lunch. And after that we'd have a little bit more class, and then we'd finish about 2:45. And my mum would come and pick us up and take us back home.
Who was your favourite teacher?
My favourite teacher was, 2 favourite teachers. There was one called Mrs West, who was my kindergarten, and then she became my 1st class teacher. And then there was another one up at this, Miss Mary Rose Foster, who was a kind of a famous teacher here. A lot of people of my age were taught by Mary Rose Foster, and she was a really good teacher.
At St Joseph's, it was just the main courtyard that still exists with the classrooms wrapped around it. And the actual breezeway in between Mrs Bagot's room and Year 6 was actually the tiny little library in that space. It was just a brick little structure, and pretty much if you just look at this space, that's what it looked like. So before the extensions that we have on the Fitzgerald side near the park. Sister Annette was the principal of St Mary's, and Sister Chanel was the principal of St Joseph's. They actually shared it. They didn't really have a vice principal and principal role. They co-shared the principalship. The classrooms were always fabulous. So they look like what they look like today. However, there wasn't a smart board, it was much more simple. We just had our blackboards. Some classrooms had whiteboards. Back then in the classroom did have a lot of artwork as well, and craft, and showed a lot of that sort of stuff because we didn't have specialist teachers. So it was all done in the room, so it was all colourful and all up because we had to incorporate that instead of it being something separate. So I remember them being colourful and bright and pretty much look the way they look today. It didn't change that much, except for the technology. I think what's special is the fact that there's always been a great relationship between the staff, the parents and the children, how it's a close-knit community, it's an energetic community, it's a healthy community that's passionate about the geographics of their school, but mainly there's always been that beautiful link with the various families that have gone through and the teachers that have been here for a long time. And to this day, I still we'll see students with babies and students that are at uni and that bump into me at the coffee shop, at the shops, here and there, and just love to have a chat. So that's that great community spirit.
Well, I was a student at St Mary's, St Joseph's, way back in the late 70s when St Mary's was right up. There were two separate schools, St Joseph's, which was the infant school that was down here, where St Mary's St Joseph is today, and St Mary's, the primary school from year 3 to year 6 was right up on the hill, right next door to the parish, right next door to the church. So I was a pupil there from 1976 to 1979 up at the church at St Mary's. And I'm also mum to Joe and mum to Rosalie in year 4 and 6. Oh, well, it's changed in lots of ways because now the two schools have come together and we're both down here at the beach. And St Mary's, as a separate school, no longer exists up on the hill. So it's all one school here, but it's changed in so many different ways as well. The uniform's completely different. When I went to school, our summer uniform was a green and white striped uniform with a tiny little bow tie for the girls, and I think the boys had brown shirts, if I remember right, and brown shorts and brown shirts. So the green and the brown, I don't know how they went together, but they did. And we used to have a brown sports uniform, and they used to have a big white stripe with a white t-shirt and a brown sort of tunic. And I think the girls used to have to wear bloomers, brown bloomers. So I've got a very strong memory of those. I remember Miss Webster. She was my teacher in year 6 and she was just lovely. She used to teach in a great way that made learning really enjoyable and fun. And she left when, I think that was her final year, when we were going off to year 7. And I remember we made up a beautiful song for her when she left, and it was to the tune of the theme of Prisoner, the television series. Well, when we were up at St Mary's, where the parish centre is now, where we sometimes have cups of tea after Mass for different things, well, that used to be school classrooms, and we used to have, I think, about 3 classrooms there. And that building actually had a second story to it. So we had, it was 2 stories. So we had 3 classrooms or 4 classrooms down the bottom and then 3 or 4 at the top, but I think it was about 3. And we had 2 sets of stairs on either end. So where Father's office is now, that used to be stairs going upstairs. We used to have the hall there. And there, where the car park is now, that used to be our playground. And we used to have a couple of demountable classrooms as well over there. And then where all that, where the new buildings for the retirement village is, that all used to be our playground. So we used to have another playground, just a big courtyard in front, and then where the church was, that was all playground and grass. So we used to go down there and play rounders and run around and play all sorts of things, and we used to have lots of fun. St Mary's St Joseph's have always been a wonderful community. When I was at school, it was a great community. It was the thing about this school and this parish, it's quite small but very strong, and I think that's really special. And for me to have gone to this school and be able to send Joe and Rosie to this school, it makes me feel very proud and feel like I'm carrying on the tradition of going back to this school. And I've seen lots of changes. They're all the same essence of the culture of St Mary's St Joseph's has remained the same the whole time. So it's a really lovely, strong community, very friendly, incredibly welcoming, and great to be here, really.
I was here in 1979 through to 1988. Well, it's a great privilege, first and foremost, I guess. It's been a wonderful experience, and I probably wouldn't change anything much about it when I think back. Probably the thing I miss most is having my own children. But I've had a lot of children over the years with the teaching and interactions and so on, so that's been fantastic. And I think probably the Brigidines being such a very unique and an order that encourages their women to take a stand on various issues of justice and so on. It's been wonderful because we're all treated quite individually, given great opportunities to travel and wonderful education. I've had a fabulous education, which I really wouldn't have had I stayed in advertising, which is what I was doing before I became a Brigidine. And I think my life would have been less rich and probably a lot narrower than it has been really since I've been a Brigidine. I think probably much the same as I always had, as in previous times. Came from Scarborough, up in Queensland, and I think what we tried to do was to enable the children to do the best they could, and to become each one, to encourage them always to be honest, to be caring, and to become the very best people they could be. So, really helping children develop the giftedness that they had innate within them. And I loved getting to know them and getting to know their parents and families. So, yeah, that was probably my vision at the time. We were going through a stage with KLAs where experiencing and experiential learning in spelling, reading, writing, and mathematics was very much kind of at the fore. The other thing was protective behaviours programs that we had. So we had a lot of different visitors and so on that came to the school at that time. So it was probably, we had more innovative things happening in that time and lots of changes educationally than probably in the previous maybe 10 years of my teaching life, which was my very early days, really. So, yeah, great things happening.